There is a moment from years ago that just showed up in your head for absolutely no reason. You said something weird at a party. You mispronounced a word in front of a group. You tripped walking into a room. And your brain just replayed it again with the same cringe, the same heat in your chest, like it happened this morning. Here is what is actually going on. This video is about confirmation bias, but not the version most people talk about. Most people think of confirmation bias as the reason you only read news that agrees with your politics. That is true, but it barely scratches the surface of what this bias is actually doing to you every single day. Because the same mechanism that filters your news feed is also the reason your brain keeps dragging you back to your most embarrassing moments, sometimes years, even decades later. And the last thing I'm going to show you is probably the most useful thing you will hear about this, because it is the one almost nobody connects to their own life. So let me start with the piece that surprises people the most. Your brain does not replay embarrassing memories randomly. It has a system. Confirmation bias is a cognitive bias that works by selectively filtering information to support beliefs you already hold. And one of the beliefs almost every person carries is some version of, I am awkward sometimes, or people judge me, or I do not always measure up. The moment you form that belief, your brain started collecting evidence for it, and your embarrassing memories are the best evidence it has ever found. So it files them carefully, flags them, and pulls them back up whenever it gets a chance to say, see, told you so. New memories are not imprinted on a blank slate. Existing knowledge intricately influences how those memories are formed and consolidated. What that means in plain terms is that your brain is not a neutral recorder. Every time something happens to you, your brain is already asking, does this fit what I already believe? When the answer is yes, it encodes that memory more deeply. When you tripped walking into that room, your brain did not just store the trip. It stored it as confirmation, as proof. And proof gets treated differently than regular information. It gets easier to find, easier to replay, and harder to let go. This is why embarrassing memories feel so much bigger than they probably were. Each time you recall one of them, your brain is not playing back an objective recording. Prior knowledge actively impacts how we encode new information by enhancing the depth and richness of memory, encoding when new information is congruent with that prior knowledge. So the memory gets reinforced, sharpened, and emotionally amplified every single time you revisit it. The cringe gets worse, not better. The moment feels more defining with each replay, not less. That is the loop. And there is a reason the loop feels almost impossible to stop. And it has to do with something happening in your brain chemistry that most people never hear about. When your brain replays an embarrassing moment and confirms your negative self-view, it does not just feel bad. There is a paradox buried in there. Your brain is wired to seek out patterns and resolve uncertainty. When it finds a match, when the memory fits the belief, there is a small neurochemical reward attached to that. Not because the memory is good, but because the prediction was right. Your brain likes being right, even when being right hurts. So revisiting these moments is not purely punishing. On some level, it is slightly satisfying in a way that keeps you coming back. That is part of what makes the loop sticky. You are not just being tortured by these memories. Your own brain is quietly incentivizing the replay. Now here is the part that really changes how you think about this. Social pain, the painful feelings that follow from social rejection, exclusion, or loss, relies on some of the same neural regions that process physical pain. Think about that for a second. When you got embarrassed in front of a group of people, your brain processed that the same way it would process getting hurt. And feelings of social pain can be re-experienced or relived, even when the painful episode has long passed. Whereas feelings of physical pain cannot be easily relived once the painful episode subsides. That is the key difference. If you broke your arm 5 years ago, you cannot just sit on your couch and feel your arm break again. But with social pain, with embarrassment, you absolutely can. And confirmation bias exploits that completely. Because every time your brain goes looking for evidence that you are the kind of person who embarrasses themselves, it finds the memory, and the memory still hurts. Reliving social pain leads to greater self-reported re-experienced pain and greater activity in the brain's affective pain regions. And the degree of relived pain correlates positively with that activity. The more you revisit it, the more it hurts. And the more it hurts, the more significant your brain decides it must be. So it files it even deeper. This is why some people seem to shake embarrassing moments off in an hour, and others are still thinking about something that happened in ninth grade. Ruminative thought is associated with hyperconnectivity between the default mode network and the subgenual anterior cingulate cortex, a pattern that self-perpetuates by suppressing the prefrontal inhibitory signals that would otherwise interrupt the loop. In plain terms, some brains are wired in a way that makes the loop harder to break. The part of your brain that is supposed to step in and say, okay, that is enough, move on, gets quieter, and the replay just keeps going. This is not a character flaw. It is a neurological pattern, and it varies from person to person. There is also a cultural layer to this that almost nobody talks about. Most people never actually discuss their embarrassing moments out loud. Not in real detail anyway. Maybe a quick laugh about it, but not a real conversation. And that silence does something specific. When you keep a memory entirely inside your own head, the only voice commenting on it is yours. There is no outside perspective to push back on the story your brain has built. No one to tell you that they did not even notice, or that they forgot about it immediately, or that they have done something 10 times worse. The confirmation bias narrative goes completely unchallenged. The brain's version of events becomes the only version, and that version, as we have already covered, gets slightly more distorted and more dramatic with every single replay. So you have a memory that already felt worse than it was. Your brain keeps pulling it back up to confirm a belief about yourself. Each replay makes the memory feel more significant. The social pain reactivates like it is fresh, and you never talk about it, so nothing ever corrects the story. That is the full loop, and now you can see exactly why it keeps running. Here is what actually breaks it. And this is the thing I mentioned at the beginning that almost nobody connects to their own experience. Consciously activating the prefrontal cortex sends calming signals through the nervous system and breaks the automatic link between a trigger and an old thought loop. The research on this points to something called metacognitive awareness, which sounds complicated, but really just means catching yourself in the act. Not trying to argue with the memory, not trying to convince yourself it was not that bad, but simply noticing what is happening. Saying to yourself, my brain is running the confirmation loop right now. That is it. That single moment of recognition shifts processing from the automatic, emotional replay system into the deliberate reasoning part of your brain. This points to the potential value of therapies that cultivate self-acceptance and modify maladaptive metacognitive beliefs for reducing rumination. You are not suppressing the memory. You are just stepping outside of it long enough to see it for what it is. A piece of old evidence your brain collected to support a story that you have probably already outgrown. And here is the thing about that story. Two of the most well-studied tendencies in psychology and neuroscience, how we remember things and how we favor information that aligns with what we already believe, may have more in common than previously thought, with new research suggesting the same brain region underlies both, which means the same mechanism that makes the loop run is also the mechanism you can target to slow it down. The prefrontal cortex is the lever. Awareness is how you pull it. So here's what actually changed from the beginning of this video. You came in thinking your brain was just bad at letting go of embarrassing moments. What is actually happening is more specific than that. Confirmation bias is turning those moments into evidence for a belief you hold about yourself. Every replay deepens the memory and adds a fresh layer of social pain on top of it. The silence around it keeps the story uncorrected, and the loop keeps running because the part of your brain built to stop it gets suppressed by the pattern itself. But the moment you name what is happening, the moment you step back and recognize the loop for what it is, you engage the exact neural system that can interrupt it. That is not a small thing. That is the whole mechanism, and now you have it. If this kind of deep dive into how your brain actually works is something you want more of, there is another video that goes right alongside this one. It covers why your brain is also wired to seek out negative information in general, and why that default setting affects far more than just your memories. It connects directly to everything we just talked about. Drop a comment below and tell me which embarrassing memory your brain will not stop replaying. Not because I need to know, but because saying it out loud is actually one of the things that starts to break the loop. And if you want to keep going, that next video is right there waiting.